Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LTA round number 2 overview and analysis video in the LTA Championship. This is the biggest one, in my opinion, for the rest of the year for the LTA. Yes, you're going to have, some series and some games to determine an LTA champion to try and figure out, which teams are going to be going in which order to Worlds, but this is the video to kind of decide basically all of the nitty-gritty stuff. Not only is it upper bracket finals between the two winners of the North and South, but it's the final qualification series for that World Championship to see who will be joining FlyQuest and Vivo Stars at that World. So I'm very excited. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comment section below. Let me know what you thought of the games. Were you surprised by the outcomes? Were you maybe expecting the way that things went? Obviously, there are some interesting things to discuss when it comes to not only the individual games, but just kind of the ramifications of the games that were played. Certainly much more expected, I would say, than the previous video that we did on the LTA Championship, but always curious to know what your thoughts and opinions are down below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the video, we'll be looking at the updated bracket, kind of talking about where I think teams are going to land. Reminder, we're down to top 3 by the end of this video already through round number 2, and so we'll be previewing the lower bracket finals, the semifinals, as I like to call them, but the next LTA video that we get is going to be both semis and finals because, timing-wise, it just makes the most sense in terms of when these games are happening, and also it didn't necessarily feel important enough to just do semifinals in its own video, considering, quite frankly, just how little it means right now in the LTA. Blame them, not me, in terms of the format, but you guys know, most of today will be spent talking about the games we got. So let's get into the first series, and this one was kind of a big one. I guess it kind of depends on what you were expecting. I was excited to watch this series because I actually did like the tape of both of these teams coming into this tournament, but boy, did it turn out a certain way. It was the number 1 seed from the North in FlyQuest versus the number 1 seed from the South in Vivo Stars, and FlyQuest absolutely dismantled them. I mean, this was a demolition in terms of how these games broke down. Like, you are very rarely going to find a series that is this dominant from basically any team. 15-0 in game number 1, and that's the longest game of the entire series. Both of the other 2 wins were sub 30 minutes. I mean, this was just not close under any circumstance. There was no opportunity for VKS to even try and get back into this series, and I think what this shows me is not that VKS is bad, and I know that's going to be kind of a, controversial, maybe not a popular takeaway from this, because I think generally it's going to be pretty easy to look at this series and say, oh, VKS bad, oh, LTA South bad. But honestly, I think the LTA South has some things going for them. They're a very aggressive region, and I think VKS in particular, they really thrive in a lot of these more, chaotic 3v3 or 4v4 skirmishes, but Fly is so much better than any other team in the LTA. It's just not even close. Like, there was no team in the North that was even remotely on their level, and it's clear that there is no team in the South that comes even close to their level as well. It does actually give me some optimism around what this team could be. I'm not trying to sit here and say that they're going to guarantee be a top 8 team at the World Championships from performances like this, but they had a substitute top laner in, and this just looked like uncompetitive. Again, like a top tier team versus a genuine bad team. I think that there is a world that FlyQuest is like genuinely top 8 in the world right now, even if I do think they have to go out and earn that. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Busio for me is player of the series, although it kind of goes to everybody. Like, when you dominate this much, is it really fair to say that anyone isn't player of the series, because they all ended up really kind of popping off, but Busio especially was just absolutely diabolical throughout this entire series. This guy has been unreal. Inspired and Busio have clearly been the 2 best players in the Americas across 2025 so far. I don't think there's any sort of argument for any other 2 players to be kind of the front runners for year-long MVP, if you want to say it like that. Perhaps in the South, like someone like Miru in the mid lane on the other side could theoretically be in that conversation, but Busio is just ridiculous, man. Like, this guy has fully grown into the potential that I think a lot of people really wanted to see from him for so many years, that Papa Smithy clearly saw in him for so many years, bringing him into the 100 Thieves system, role swapping him to support, and then bringing him over to FlyQuest when he took over here as well. it's just really cool to see a player kind of actually grow into exactly what we thought he could be. There's been so many, development successes right now in North America with players like Busio. I think someone like Jan obviously comes to mind as a really highly touted prospect that turned into a great player. Masu on this team is living up to the billing, I would say, especially from an international perspective. Like, it's cool to see that the NA development system is working out, at least when teams actually do try and invest into those players, and Busio is probably the single best example of that. His playmakers, like, they're just better than everybody else's. His Nico, his Rakan, like, when he gets a champion that can actively affect the game and can move around the map and be a lot more aggressive in terms of the way that they look for engages, it's unstoppable. Like, that's the easiest way I can possibly say it, is there's just nobody in the Americas that has the skill level to be able to stop that, and he showed internationally that, quite frankly, there aren't a lot of international players that are going to be able to stop that from an efficiency, perspective. He was better than On in the series that he played against BLG, and they just went out and won the LPL. Obviously, very different circumstances for BLG, but Busio is for real. I don't think anybody is really doubting that at this point. The other player that I considered for player of the series, Gatgos on the top side. He was awesome in this series, and, I want to make a caveat that Boal is probably the weakest player on VKS. That was pretty clear to me when I was watching the film, where top lane just was not a particularly important role for where VKS were as a team. They wanted to play through mid, and they wanted to play through bot, and Desamis is like, he's fine as an early game jungler to be able to facilitate that. He wants to play, champions that help out lanes, but top lane is oftentimes left on an island for VKS, and Gatgos, I think, while he's not the most polished player in the world, especially when it comes down to mid and late game team fighting, like, he's clearly very young. His age absolutely shows in the fact that he's just not particularly consistent in that phase of the game. He is really good at picking Aurelia and Jax and Aatrox and just dominating the laning phase. Like, the mechanics really shine through in this series. I think most people would have beaten Boal in the way that he played in this series, but Gatgos definitely deserves a pretty big mention. Inspired, Quad, Masu, they were all excellent. They all ended up gapping their opposition. The important one for me in terms of how this series went was Quad in the mid lane. Miru on the other side is the most important player for VKS. He's the best player in the LTA South. I don't think there's any real argument in any other direction. I also really like this bot lane of Morteus and Trimby. We'll talk about that on the other side, and they also kind of got gapped in this series, but Miru just being completely irrelevant on things like Akali and Yone is massive, because he's been able to take over so many games on those champions, not only this year, but in previous years when this guy has made international runs before. I've sung the praises of Miru for years on this channel, and he continued to have a great 2025, and Quad just made him look embarrassed. Like, in this series, it just was everything. Every single part of this series was a gap in favor of FlyQuest. I wish I had more to break down or kind of talk about in terms of individual plays, but honestly, there's no point. There is no reason to go into individual plays in this series. If you want to take away from FlyQuest's perspective, they are infinitely better than any other team in the Americas. There's not a single other team in NA or in Brazil that can do anything to challenge or compete with FlyQuest, and hopefully that ends up boding well for them at the World Championships. And then for VKS, for Vivo Keedstars on the other side, I liked this team coming into this tournament, and I'm gonna be kind of controversial here. I still like this team coming out of this series. I think this says more about FlyQuest than it does about VKS, and I think it's fair to disagree with that. Now, if they go down to the lower bracket and get smashed by whoever they play in the lower bracket that we'll talk about in the series next, then obviously my opinion and my thoughts are going to change on what VKS are as a unit. But watching tape on them, I actually was really impressed with the hands that they had and the ability to just kind of generate resources. This team was consistently up in gold. I think there are things that they need to figure out. They're not a particularly proficient macro team. Their mid games can get a little bit sloppy. They're not very objective focused, which I think can really be a problem at times. But Trimby is a good shot caller, and you can see that they're often not in bad positions, which for the most part is kind of the biggest problem that, these minor region teams end up running into, is they just, while they can be in good spots and they can create good advantages, they don't really limit the bad plays, and great teams are going to be really effective at taking advantage of your biggest weaknesses. I don't think VKS generally make all that many mistakes, but boy, did they get hands checked in this series. Like, it was just a massive diff in terms of the talent on the Rift, and I think that that is just kind of the reality going into FlyQuest in particular. Boal is dud of the series for me. Not really a lot to talk about here. The Ambessa, the Gwen, the Scion. I mean, it was a massive top gap in favor of Gatgos, and I think most top laners would have been there, right? Like, Bwipo obviously not playing this series because he was suspended, but, Gatgos is not a perfect player. We've seen it through his time in North America that he is not a finished product product just yet. Really, he's not ready to start for a team as good as FlyQuest. He would be like a lower mid-table top laner in North America if he were given a full-time starting spot, and Boal just looked completely incompetent against him, which I think is definitely a bit, frustrating and disappointing. I think Miru, as I already talked about, was completely useless. 1-13-11 is indicative of just where he was at in terms of this series, playing things like Akali and Yone, like I pointed out. He is an assassin player. He's somebody who wants to be aggressive, wants to play these melee mids, and wants to take over the game. He can be your primary carry, and quite frankly, he should be your primary carry. If he's getting shut down and has no resources, if he gets 1 kill across 3 games, like, it's cooked for VKS. There's no way for them to be able to pick up wins in that scenario. Morteus and Trimby, I think, are a good bot lane, and Morteus, I think, at least kind of showed some cleanup ability here. His team fighting has been excellent throughout all of this year. That was one of the things I was most impressed with when it came to VKS, was just how good they were in team fights. I think a lot of times because Morteus is very consistent in that phase of the game, but Masu and Busio are the best bot lane in the West right now. It's really tough to imagine a world where they go up against them and survive, and that's kind of what happened. Desamas as well, like, what do you want me to say? He played Jarvan and Maokai and got completely out-tempoed by Inspired, who is the single best player in the West, full stop. So for VKS, I'd love to sit here and, cry out that this team is terrible and, like, talk about how, bad it is for the LTA South that this team is so uncompetitive. But honestly, I think this, like I said, reflects more on FlyQuest being unbelievably good rather than VKS being terrible. Like, if they go down to the lower bracket and get stomped, we'll have a completely different story in the next video that we talk about them. But for now, it's kind of a wait-and-see approach because I just view FlyQuest that highly. I genuinely think they're at least 2 tiers above every other team in the Americas. I think they have a real shot to compete with, like, the second and third best teams from the LPL in terms of where they're at, talent-wise. Even, the first team, right? They took BLG to 5, and now BLG won the LPL. I'm not saying that FlyQuest is better than the #1 seed from the LPL or anything like that, but I think that they're closer to that than they are to VKS, and I think that that's become increasingly more clear as we've watched more games from them. They're not getting challenged at all domestically. The only hope is that they can go internationally and actually live up to the expectations that they've now set for themselves. But then moving on to our second series of the video and moving down to the lower part of the bracket, this one is even more important than the upper bracket finals that we just talked about. Yes, you get into top 2 and you guarantee yourself one of those top 2 seeds. That's all well and good, but this series qualifies you for the World Championships. The winner moves on to, at the very least, the lower bracket finals here, but moves on to top 3 and gets themselves a world spot, where the loser is done for the year. It is win or go home for both of these teams. It's the #2 seed from the LTA North and 100 Thieves taking on the #2 seed from the LTA South and RED Canids. And 100 Thieves absolutely dominate this series. Once again, they're going to pick up a 3-0, 2 3-0s to go over in today's video. Not quite the same as Fly versus VKS, because that series was not close under any circumstance. Red actually put up a really good fight, I would say, in this series. Some great performances from players like FNB that actually did a great job of getting leads on their own on the top side, playing Rek'Sai and Smolder and Galio, basically playing no top laners. Dokla, had some struggles, I think, at times being able to keep up with the hands of RED Canids, but at the end of the day, the macro is the big difference here, and that's where 100 Thieves come out on top, and then, sprinkle a little bit of a gigantic mid gap in there, and I think things end up equalizing. Let's go ahead and talk about it. Quid is the obvious choice for player of the series. You want to talk about players that are competing to be the best in North America. Well, Quid is absolutely in that conversation. He just hasn't had the chance to showcase it nearly as much as a lot of other players because the rest of the team around him isn't quite at that level, but this guy is a superstar. There is nothing else left to see. He is dominant in the mid lane. His mechanics are better than anybody in North America. I'm very willing to say that. Like, it's not just, oh, he's a smart player that can, do what needs to be done. I love Inspired, I love players like Busio, I love Yon, like all of these players that I consider, top tier in their role and some of the best in the entire league. None of them mechanically, like pure hands-wise, are as good as Quid. Like, he is just able to dominate people in a way that, is not normal. It is not normal to be able to do this at the LTA level. And, RED Canids, for as much as they're going to get crap for this series, like, they are a good team and they've overperformed expectations. They clearly play better as a unit than they do, individual players. Like, they deserve a lot of credit for how they ended up playing throughout this tournament and even getting here, but Quid embarrassed them. The Aurora, the Silas, the Cassiopeia, he died once throughout this entire series. This was a competitive series. Like, all of these games were at the very least interesting, specifically game #2 for Quid to play Silas in that second game and, come out of this series with 1 death. It's unfair. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous how good he was for this team, and he went into the best player on RED Canids as well. So just so much praise for this guy. He absolutely deserves to go to the World Championship. Championships. He is one of the best players in North America, one of the best players in the West, and I hope he gets a chance to prove that internationally, unlike what he did last year. I do want to give some credit to the bot lane as well, who I think are going to go a bit under the radar for how good they were in this series. People are going to be very excited for River, and obviously I'm very excited for River in what is likely his final year playing professionally. He gets to go back to the World Championships. Big Dokes gets picked up midway through the year as a coach, and then obviously kind of becomes the top laner, gets to go to Worlds again as a top lane player. But FBI and Ayla, I think, are continuing to establish themselves as one of the most consistent bot lanes in the entire West. And, you know, really, I think that there is just a lot to like about how these two play off of each other. Neither of them are all that aggressive or all that flashy. It's not like Masu and Busio, where, you know, Busio's such a flashy player. He's going to be such a playmaker to create a lot of these advantages, and Masu is such a team fight god that he's able to really, you know, have all these big pop-off moments, get quadra kills in 5v5s at the end of games, things like that. FBI and Ayla don't have that same kind of play style. They don't have that same kind of setup for themselves, but they are so consistent at being able to generate resources in the 2v2, and Ayla is really good at playing these engaged tanks, whereas Busio, you know, a player like that wants to thrive on things like Rakan and Nico that can give, and Bard, obviously, that give you a lot of priority and playmaking potential. Ayla is so good on Rel and on Alistair and on Nautilus and on these more, you know, I guess facilitative types of champions that want to play for 5v5s. I just think he's really perfect for what 100 Thieves want to do, and he was excellent in this series. FBI continues to be really good as that secondary carry. I think when they rely on him to be the primary option, this team can definitely struggle, but if Quid is going to be like that guy, which he has been for basically all of this year, FBI slots so perfectly into that number 2 option where he doesn't need all these resources. He can play things like Senna and Ziggs and still be very useful, still be very good in team fights, right? Like that kind of identity, I think he's really good in that role. So credit to the 100 Thieves bot lane. River and Dokla, like I said, had some ups and downs. I think Dokla in particular had a couple of bad moments throughout this series, but at that point, we're kind of nitpicking things. I think FNB just ended up picking some very crazy things on the top side, getting a lot of resources from his team, and Dokla was kind of the unfortunate byproduct of that, but you know, I at least have to point out that it wasn't exactly a perfect series from Big Dokes to get himself to Worlds, but River was, you know, solid enough. I would say in the jungle, don't love the Lee Sin, but it's game 3 and you're up 2-0. I think you feel pretty comfortable going to something like that, and it did end up working out, and honestly, storyline-wise, I'm very happy for River. He's playing the best league he's played all year long. Right now, he's in phenomenal form, and in his final year, he gets to go to the World Championships. That's fantastic, but it's the overall message. It's not just River's final year, it's 100 Thieves' final year in League of Legends. They have already announced that they're not coming back for 2026. They announced that basically at the beginning of the year. And so, you know, we're looking at a team that's on their final stand, and a team that's stuck together and kind of committed to this core of players. You know, basically the starting 5 from last year's World Championship run without Sniper and with Dokla in the top lane. Like, that's what you're looking at for this team. A bunch of players that people wrote off, players like FBI and Ayla and Dokla that were not getting the respect that they deserved coming into the year. They have proven everybody wrong, and once again gotten this team and this organization to Worlds for one final time. And then for RED Canids, you know, they came very close. They took down Shopify Rebellion. I think they have to consider this tournament a win, even though they're not going to the World Championships. I think it would have been a long shot for them to ever get there in the first place, but for them to be this close, for them to get one series away from Worlds, I think is already so huge for this collection of players. Not only were they counted out here at this tournament against teams like Shopify, they were counted out in the LTA South. This was not supposed to be a top 3 team coming into the LTA South year, and yet here they are. They end up getting better and better basically every game as they play throughout the entire year, and they just can't capitalize as they get to the LTA Championship. But again, being one series away for a roster that's, you know, not full rookies, but certainly young and not expected to perform this way, you know, it's kind of like 100 Thieves last year, even if they did make it to Worlds. It's just one of those teams where you have to feel excited about what the future could potentially hold. Unfortunately, didn't really come out here today. FNB, like I said, was genuinely very good on some of these counter picks on the top side. It did look like they wanted to go for some of these off-meta stuff, and, you know, I kind of respect that from RED Canids. I respect the drafts, and I respect the identity of trying to get your top laner into a spot if you feel like he can take over in a good matchup. It kind of worked. You just didn't really have things elsewhere. I think the biggest problem is that your best player, Kaze, in the mid lane just lost. Like, Quid was just infinitely better, and this is why I talked about this being such a terrible matchup for Red in last week's episode when I kind of mentioned, like, oh, I think 100 Thieves are going to stop this. I think it will be 3-0. Like, the reason I said that is because, okay, well, Red wants to get advantages through the mid lane, and I just don't think they can into Quid, and that's unfortunately exactly what happened. I like Kaze, but he is done of the series. The Azir, the Orianna, the Rise, all of it felt outclassed by Quid on the other side. He never had tempo. He was constantly down in golden resources, and he never was able to make plays in team fights. It was just kind of a bad series where the better mid laner ended up winning, and Unfortunately for Kaze, it's just kind of what you run into when you try to get to the World Championships, but he had a phenomenal year, especially for a player that wasn't really expected to be as dominant as he was. And, I'm excited to see what he ends up becoming in the future if he sticks around in the LTA South. Players like Doom, Rebello, Frosty, I think they were fine enough. Doom had some problems. Rebello's positioning at times is terrible on this team, like genuinely very, very egregiously bad. And I think Doom's macro is not good. Like his tempo and his pathing and his pacing is just, much worse than basically every Worlds caliber jungler that you are actually going to see. But these are all very minor nitpicks. I guess minor, like they're pretty major nitpicks, but they're nitpicks that can be solved for a young team in RED Canids that hopefully will be able to bounce back next year. I don't really know if they're going to be able to keep around this entire roster. I would kind of hope so because they look so good as a unit. If they can fix some of their macro mistakes and genuinely get on the right track, their hands are really good. Like they absolutely went toe-to-toe with 100 Thieves in terms of resources. They just couldn't really close out any of these games and, actually stick with a team that's just a little bit better than them in the later part. There are a lot of things to build off of for RED Canids, and I'm hopeful that they're capable of doing that in 2026. But for 100 Thieves, congratulations again to this team and to this org for once again making the World Championships. In their last hurrah, in their final shot, they are able to get themselves back to the international stage. And now it's up to this core that this organization has trusted over the past 2 years to be able to get them across the finish line into some major company. I don't think this team is going to make some major upsets at Worlds, but right now they've still got another series to go. This could absolutely be a top 2 seed from the LTA, and I'm very interested to see what happens when they go up against VKS. All right, but that is going to do it for my LTA Championship Round 2 overview and analysis video. Up on the screen, the updated bracket. We know our top 3 teams, and by proxy, we know our 3 teams going to the World Championships to represent the LTA. FlyQuest will bare minimum get one of the top 2 seeds. Either they win the championship or they don't. Right now, they look like pretty major favorites in order to do that. And then, Vivo Stars and 100 Thieves are going to be fighting it out in the semifinals, the lower bracket finals here, to determine who that, second seed or third seed could potentially be. Let's go ahead and preview that series to talk about who I think will come out on top. I think this is a very fun matchup between 2 very fun teams. I think 100 Thieves are likely going to have the best player on the Rift in Quid, and I think they're going to have maybe a better bot lane, which makes me very concerned for VKS. I think this matchup really just comes down to mid lane. Can Miru have a better performance than what he did against FlyQuest, because he got kind of embarrassed by FlyQuest, and he's the anchor of this team. If he can step up and actively push them forward, I think VKS have the ability to play around him in a strong enough way to generate leads against a team like 100 Thieves, because, top and jungle aren't exactly the most dominant players in the world. Even bot lane can be beaten, but it's just really hard to imagine a world where, Quid isn't the best player on the Rift. I think to beat 100 Thieves, you need to be able to win everywhere except for mid, and, if you're a mid-focused team, I just think 100 Thieves is a terrible matchup for you. It's why I talked about that for Red. In the previous series, he was mid-focused, and VKS is also very mid-focused. I think 100 Thieves are going to win this series, not because I think they're infinitely better as a team, but because I think the matchup very much favors them in terms of where the strengths and weaknesses lie of each of these individual rosters. I do think it will be close, though. My prediction is going to be 100 Thieves 3-2. I think VKS is going to push this to 5. I think they're better than people think they are because of that FlyQuest series. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the South is just bad. Maybe this is another 3-0 and we just get a North American Finals, and if that's the case, then it is what it is, right? Like, North absolutely should be better, and, Shopify should have never lost to Red in the first place, but I do think VKS are going to, at the very least, be more competitive in this series than they were against Fly. But let me know if you agree or disagree with that takedown in the comment section below. Very curious to know your thoughts and opinions on whether or not you agree with me on Vivo Stars, or whether or not you think 100 Thieves are just going to have such an easy time with this series. Very curious to know, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, like I said, the next video coming out on the LTA will be the final one, both the semifinals and the finals covered in the same video coming next week. I'm very excited to talk about, how exactly the playoffs end up ending and, what seeds everybody's going to go as, but we're covering every other major region as well. LEC took a bit of a hiatus, and so no video this week for them, but we're covering them next week when they come back. The LCK, of course, still going on. Just posted a video about them yesterday, and we just posted about the LPL finals a couple of days ago, and now the regional qualifiers are starting for them to get their number 3 and number 4 seed, which is a great transition to LPL English. I am still, working with LPL English this time, or at least for now, for the rest of the season as somebody who is working on the analyst desk. As an analyst for them, I will be on the analyst desk for a couple of the regional series, the 2 final ones. So Weibo Gaming versus JD Gaming to kind of stay alive in the regional qualifiers, and then whoever, that final matchup is for the number 4 seed. I will be on the analyst desk for LPL English for both of those series. You can check out the links in the description to either the YouTube or the Twitch if you are interested in checking that out. Come say hi in chat if I'm live. I would very much like to see you guys there, and if you want to catch any of my thoughts and opinions in real time, that's definitely the place to do it. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. Hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all